Mic on. Okay, so we got kittens, and I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Anyway, we're going to return to our series in the book of Exodus. I know we took a long break there as we were on our journey to the resurrection and learning how Jesus has transformed us even after the resurrection as we were looking in this letter to Philemon. But now that we're returning to the book of Exodus, we left off in Exodus chapter 20 where God had delivered instructions himself, the Ten Commandments to Israel. And the thing about God delivering these instructions is they weren't first delivered on a stone tablet. They were first delivered by God's mouth to the people, and the people were terrified to hear God. And the instructions that God gives them in those 10 commandments seem, I don't know, in principle pretty easy, right? And we can summarize it just by saying, love God and love others. And when you think about something like love God and love others, you either think, okay, well, this is up to me to determine how I love God and how I love others, or it goes the other way where you're saying, I need specific instructions about how to love. What is love, and what do those actions look like? And loving others, what does that look like? And God delivers those instructions. And so we're going to move past that moment where God was up on the mountain delivering those words, and we're going to return to Exodus chapter 20 there at just the end of that chapter, verses 22 through 26, which was the scripture reading. And we can go all the way to chapter 31 to learn a great big lesson about the instructions that God gives, why it's important he gives them, and how to apply them. You know, much like kittens, these Israelites are coming out of a place where the rules that God had for them were good things, but they would never know those rules unless God gave them to him and gave them to him himself. They were coming from a place of polytheism under a bunch of Egyptian gods, and the only thing that they understood about authority was that they were ruled by people that ruled fiercely and abusively over them. And so if the Israelites under Egyptian rule did anything wrong, their slave masters, their harsh slave masters, were the ones to reprimand them. And they could do so in any way that they liked. But when God brings them to the wilderness and then says to them, okay, these are the true instructions, and I'm giving them to you myself, some of these might seem obvious, but God is talking to them as people that have no idea what true holiness and what a true God and a true God relationship looks like. And so it's necessary for him to deliver them to them in a certain order and by his own mouth. And so there is clarity between what's expected of you now that you are my people under me, and how you will live with each other. And the general expectation is simply, you love me and you love each other. And I'm going to tell you how to do it. And this is how God tells them how to do it. We're working under the old covenant being established in this very moment. And God will start teaching them laws. There at the end of Exodus chapter 20, going all the way to chapter 23, God starts with laws. And you know, when you get to the law sections of Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, and even parts of Deuteronomy, you're like, whew, this is a lot. And this is a lot to remember. And this is like more information than I think that I want right now when I'm going through this. But they needed to hear it, and it needed to be exhaustive, so they were clear in their understanding of how to be with God. And so after God teaches them the laws, then he teaches them, well, after you understand this, then you also understand that being in a relationship with me and following me comes with blessings. It will be a blessing for you, and it will be a blessing between each other. And that follows along with the idea of you love me and you love each other when you follow my laws. And not only that, but I will be the one that protects you. I'm the one that provides for you. I'm the one that goes before you, and you can come to me. And under this relationship, you'll understand what it truly is like to be blessed, especially after coming out of a situation where it seemed you were the opposite of blessed. And so God will first deliver the laws, and then he will deliver the blessings according to that, and then he invites them into the covenant. Instead of bringing them into the covenant and then giving them a list of rules and expectations, God gives that first and then says, you understand this, and then we can be together. And after that covenant is when you will find fellowship and being able to worship in my sanctuary and in my temple. And this order is important for them to understand that. This order is important in the way that God gives it to them so that they know what they're getting into before they actually get into it, right? Maybe we wish we had that understanding in a lot of different areas, right? You know, you're interviewing for a job and then you get to the job and you're like, this is not exactly what I signed up for, but I did sign up for it, but I didn't want to do this much. Whereas God says, here's the clear understanding. Establish the covenant with me. This is what's expected of you. You have fellowship with me only after that. Only after that you will find this true fellowship. And so, with loving God and loving others, it seems like we're just going to read a whole bunch of list of rules, right? Do we want to just open up to Leviticus and just burn through this real quick? I don't think that we would get a lot of productivity out of that, especially because maybe for us, under the new covenant, we get exhausted quickly by the old covenant and the list of laws because it only seems like a list of laws. However, even being a Christian under the new covenant, being connected with God through the blood of Jesus Christ, there's still this perception that we're just a bunch of Christians that are just living under a list of rules. You know, it's like Christianity is just a bunch of list of rules, and it's you're not allowed to do anything, you're not allowed to have fun, and that's a misconception. I actually really like what Jonah said at the table this morning when he said God was speaking through the Apostle Paul to tell the people about the communion. Here's what you're doing wrong, because there's a way to do it right, and here's what's right. You're doing this wrong, you're doing this right. This is how it should be done. And it's vital for you to understand how this should be done because it honors me. When you're coming together to partake of the Lord's Supper, there is a mindset to have and there is a God to honor. It's not about what you want it to be or what you turn it into be. It's about me and my covenant with you. That's more than just a list of rules. And so is the faith altogether. You see, Christianity, faith in God, is more than just a bunch of lists of rules and we're not allowed to do anything. It's the understanding that the guardrails that God gives us, the instructions that God gives us, are good things. They are the things that keep us honorable before a holy and eternal God. They are the things that we can turn down because if we accept them, then we are not only out of peace with God, but we will actually find chaos within our own lives and chaos with each other. The rules and the instructions that God gives provide peace, and they're not just rules for rules' sake. They are good things. And so it's peace with each other, and then it's an understanding of I would rather honor God before I would put myself above him and create my own rules, my own way, and find dishonor with him, but maybe honor with everybody else. And so we look to God for how we should live, just as Israel now had to look to God for how they should live. As we look to God for the choices that we make, just as Israel had to look to God for the choices that they were going to make, they were going to find that God's ways were the best way to live. And keeping that at the forefront of their mind, of their decisions and of their society, showed that it was not only the best way to live, but it was the right way to live. It was the way to live that kept harmony between the people. And so when we look at maybe just even the laws of God, in these few sections of chapter, even the end of chapter 20, chapter 21, chapter 22, and part of chapter 23, you find that God is creating laws that have to do with people being good to each other. This is how you're going to treat this person. This is how you're going to treat each other. And this is right. And if you wrong somebody, they're going to cry out to me and I'm going to hear the wrong. And so you're both going to answer to me. The one that was wronged and the one that did the wrong will both answer to me. When it comes to social justice, I will give you the instructions and the laws for that. And you will understand that those laws come from my mouth and you will answer to me. If you're a priest, it's not just you that has the rules of God. The priests are not the only ones that are expected to be the good people, right? The priests, you have your special category of what you were supposed to do in helping the people live under me. But the instructions that you give are by my authority. And so it wasn't just the priests, it was everybody that had the same understanding that if God is at the top of our society and at the top of our instructions, it doesn't matter if you're a priest or if you're a lowly market person. It doesn't matter if you're the king or if you're the servant. It doesn't matter if you're the shepherd or the sojourner. You answer to God. And so, with that on everybody's mind, with a clear understanding, there was this awareness that, okay, I really should be honorable in all of my business transactions because God is watching. And God will also send the king to punish those that are doing wrong. I better be good in the way that I interact with my neighbor, in the way that I raise my kids, because it's the same God that said, under me no one disrespects their parents, is the same God that says no one kills another person in a rage and gets away with it, which is the same God that says you will treat people with justice and kindness, whether they are from your community or whether they're a sojourner. Same God that says you will not be greedy with your money that God gives you is the same God that says you will not practice sexual sins, is the same God that says you won't lie to each other about each other, which is the same God that says I am your God and you will worship me only. And some of those things, as we said before, almost seem obvious, right? We were reading our chronological Bible, Courtney and I, and we were in this section, and man, if you thought reading Leviticus and Numbers separately was a lot, when they get put together in a chronological Bible, it's like months of reading, literal months, like maybe 2 or 3 or 4 or something like that. And it's because you read it in one book and then you read the same thing just from the other book and they put them together. We got to this section where God is condemning specifically and outlawing bestiality. And Courtney stopped the reading. She's like, wait, hang on. Isn't that obvious? Like, they have to be told that. Like, shouldn't they just know that normally, you know? And that's a fair point. That's an accurate question, you know? But understanding that means that when God is instructing a small group of people, you're not going to do this because it's unnatural, it's unhealthy, it's shameful altogether. This is not the way that man and animals are supposed to live with each other and be with each other. I have to tell you that because it's being practiced in the societies around you, and you will have no part of that. That's not right, one thing. And for another thing, the right way is not like that. And so what seems obvious to some people is actually just normalized to a bunch of other people. And so God has to be clear about even something like that. And so under God's instructions, when God is the authority of that, it's pretty clear, I don't want to do it because it's bad, and I don't want to answer for it because it's wrong. And so to obey these things is to understand that God is the authority of all things, and that things are natural when they come from him, and to disobey them is the understanding that without this God, then we can just make up whatever we want to do. And then do we need an idol to answer to? We could just remove the idol altogether and then do whatever we want, and you won't find peace in that. You'll find chaos in that. Later on in the book of Psalm, chapter 133, Psalm 133, in this song from David, generations removed, can find the word of God and realize this is beautiful, perfect harmony when we are under God and we do it together. Psalm 133, a song of ascents of David. Behold how good and pleasant it is when brothers dwell in unity. It is like the precious oil on the head running down on the beard of Aaron, running down on the collar of his robes. It's like the dew of Hermon, which falls on the mountains of Zion. And for there the Lord has commanded the blessing, life forevermore. You know, when we live peaceably under God, it's like the first priest Aaron getting anointed. It's beautiful, wonderful harmony. And at that moment when God commanded it, we were learning about life forevermore. This is what I crave, says David in this song. This is what we should want, is the very thing that God had promised to us. When we follow his laws, we also find the blessing that comes from that. And so laws came first, and then the blessings for following those came afterwards. And God is saying, I'm going to go before you to conquer your enemies. You will be victorious. You'll be fruitful in the land. There will be no miscarriages. Like, what's not to want when God is in charge? And so if you can understand this, when you have God's commands plainly, Israel, you can follow me plainly. You can have fellowship with me plainly. You can understand blessings plainly. And this is how it should be. And when God is involved, or he's not involved and is not the authority, and the inspiration of their choices, the unhealthy relationships follow that. And a chaotic society becomes normalized. And so Israel is learning, just as we can learn, that when God is the head of our choices and our decisions at the forefront of our mind, we can find good things coming from his instructions. We can find the understanding, how do I be in fellowship with God? And so after God delivers the laws and the blessings, then he moves into the covenant in chapter 24. And the covenant is established in this way. In Exodus chapter 24, verse 3, it says this: Moses came and told the people all the words of the Lord and all the rules, and all the people answered with one voice and said, all the words that the Lord has spoken, we will do. That's what God commands. That's what we want. That's what God provides. That's what we want. We want to be the Lord's. We're not being goaded into it like God is going to force us into a relationship. It's not that God is trapping them into a relationship. The option is theirs. And what they have chosen is what God has said. That's what we'll do. We understand what we're getting into. And in verse 4 it says, and Moses wrote down all the words of the Lord, and he rose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain and 12 pillars according to the 12 tribes of Israel. And he sent young men of the people of Israel who offered burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings of oxen to the Lord. And Moses took half of the blood and put it in the basins, and half of the blood he threw it against the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant and read it in the hearing of the people, and they said, all that the Lord has spoken we will do, and we will be obedient. And Moses took the blood and threw it on the people and said, behold, the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you in accordance with all these words. And so the Old Testament, the Old Covenant, is established. They are in covenant, the Old Covenant, with God. And it's only after this covenant is established that then the people start collecting contributions for the sanctuary, and then God will deliver them the instructions of how are the priests supposed to be? What are the outfits that they're going to wear? What are their responsibilities depending on age group? Who are they going to communicate with, and where are they going to live? And then those instructions make it very clear about what worshiping God was supposed to be like. It's exhaustive, and maybe God could have even had it more exhaustive. But one of the pinnacles of God's temple in this relationship was that God was the only one in the temple. And if they brought in an idol, then they were showing we prefer something else equal or more to God, and we prefer our way equal or more to God. And God was not going to be a God that shares in the sanctuary, that shares in the covenant. It was just him and just his people. And when they started putting themselves above, or what they wanted above God, they realized that God was going to remove the blessing, that God was rightfully going to remove the blessing. The laws were still in place, but then you found chaos among each other and chaos in their society, and later on they would be overrun by nations that didn't practice the good things of God. And they themselves had essentially welcomed it in. When God is not the head of choices, when God is not the head of our life's directions, we can do whatever we want. It's possible to do whatever we want. But without God being recognized as the head of us, of ourselves, even just as an individual that makes up the collective, we will find that we have more strife. And it almost seems like we could be doing the right thing, but why does even doing the wrong thing when it's what I want to do not find satisfaction in me? Not find goodness. But when God is the head and directs our lives and our choices and everything that we want to do, we find that we make up a community that equally loves to have God and understands his place of authority that we answer to, and then see the results of his blessing among us as a whole. And then we find fellowship with God according to God's commands, according to God's instructions to be serving God. And therefore, the worship, not only just our lives, but the worship becomes just as much about God as it is supposed to be. This Lord's Supper again this morning. As Jonah pointed out, people had abused the coming together. They had made it about themselves. And they had decided to do so, and it hurt those that were poor. And it had hurt some, and others had too much. And this was God correcting them, saying, this is wrong. But when you partake of the Lord's Supper according to the instructions, and Paul follows that up with, this is what Jesus told us to do, and this is what we're going to do, you find that you have fellowship and self-examination with each other. And so you have an inner searching and a unifying understanding and a true worshiping of God. And so God's instructions in the worship service were not meant for somebody's entertainment or to exalt somebody above another person or any category to be exalted. It was all meant to honor God in God's way, according to God's instructions. And then when we apply that to our life, we will find the same results. We're not so concerned about honoring other people as much as we are trying to honor God. And so you have the covenant established in the Old Testament where God teaches laws, blessings, covenant, and then fellowship with me. And even as exhaustive as it is, people cannot get it right. And that leaves God with a couple of choices that these people have entered into a covenant with him, and the Hebrew writers explaining how detrimental it is for them to understand the necessity of blood being a part of the covenant, both in the Old Testament and the New Testament, because they were bound to do this and had all verbally agreed to do it. But when they don't do it, who should be at fault here? Well, it's not God for violating the covenant because he never did. It's the people. And so should God just wipe humanity off the face of the planet? Who would bring him into sentence if God did that? All the people were wrong, and God was right. Who would bring God into sentence for doing that? Or should God lower his expectations and say, you know, it's just not that bad. Just let everybody do what makes them happy, and it'll be okay. And that would be contrary to God's perfection and God's goodness, and he wouldn't allow evil like that. The third option is for God to come down among the people and teach them himself once again, instead of an intermediary like Moses, but he himself will come down and say, this is what it's like to love God and love others. And this is what God commands, and you will follow it. And when you follow it, you'll have the blessing of eternal life. And when you break it, you'll have eternal separation. The fellowship choice is yours. And that's the option that God opts for. When Jesus is in his ministry on the Sermon on the Mount, he doesn't start with, these are the laws that you have broken. What Jesus teaches on the Sermon on the Mount is actually first blessings. Blessed are you. Blessed are you. Blessed are those in the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you. You're reaching for a place where you're trying to find satisfaction and peace and joy. Well, blessed are you because here it is. And if you can understand the blessing that you're craving, then you will understand the laws of God. And Jesus doesn't go into wiping the laws away in the continual teaching of the Sermon on the Mount. Actually, it's almost that Jesus is getting to the true problem of the matters that they're having. He's saying it starts in the heart. My law was do not commit adultery. But if it starts in your heart, then you're already broken. My law was this, and you're trying to avoid the action of doing it, but if the problem is inside of you, then that's where the correction needs to start. And so Jesus doesn't excuse the old law. Actually, he will continue to teach, we're going to fulfill that thing, and I'm going to bring in the New Testament, the New Covenant. But the major problem is that you thought you could just do the action or not do the action and think it was righteous and miss the whole point that God was going to change you inside and out. And so self-examination is the part where you understand it's about the relationship. It's about truly desiring God. And on the inside, when we truly desire that, we start to find out that, man, maybe the things that I like and that I enjoy that are normal to me are contrary to God. Maybe the things that I used to justify to myself, God is not going to excuse. Actually, he's going to call it into account and say this needs to change. And so after Jesus, God himself teaches, there's a great blessing to be had in my kingdom. And then teaches, you're going to have to understand the way that things are supposed to be in this kingdom, and you will follow them, and you'll be mine. That's when Jesus establishes the new covenant by his blood, and then welcomes people into a fellowship and a worship with him. And that is the rest of the Bible right there. Keeping God at the top of our church, at the top of our lives, as the source of inspiration for our choices and our lifestyle. And so just as much as Israel needed God to teach them directly, we need God to have direct authority over us. Direct authority over ourselves in every part of our life. Because when we don't have Jesus guiding our lives and our choices, we place our own desires above him or equal to his authority. And that's where we will find that we have no peace. We only have anxiety. We have something missing that we're craving for. As your preacher, I can't force you to do anything. And thank God I can't, because I would not want that kind of micromanagement responsibility. And you would be really annoyed with me, more than you already are. As your preacher, I can't force you to do anything. I can only advocate for Jesus Christ in your life. I can advocate deeply for Jesus Christ to be the head of your life. But you have to choose to make him the king of your life. I will advocate for nobody in this pulpit to be the crown of your life except for Jesus Christ. And when that happens, and he is truly the crown of your life, and you truly want his authority in every part of your life, you'll see your actions may have to change, and your choices may have to change, and your lifestyle may have to change. But when you submit to Jesus Christ, you find that that submission brings out peace. It brings out peace beyond just your time on earth, but into eternity. It brings out peace more than just a period or an era of your life in one place. But it brings out peace knowing that if I honor God, I know that he will honor me. But if I honor man, then that's just going to be temporary for a short time. I would rather have the eternal honoring King in my life as the one that I will answer to. And so is Jesus the authority, the crown, the inspiration of your choices? Is Jesus Christ on the throne and teaching you how to treat people? Is Jesus Christ the authority in the way that you work, maybe even what you do for work? Is Jesus Christ the head of all the decisions that you make in every part of your life? He deserves to be. And he rewards those that make him the king of your life. Do you want to be in the king's company? Do you want to be a citizen of an eternal king, a peaceful king, a loving king, a king of justice, not tyranny? Then he urges you to follow his instructions and see what you find in him. If there's anything that I can do for you to help make Jesus the king of your life, you can see me at the back while we sing this song, Where He Leads, I'll Follow.